The one-size-fits-all approach. One of the biggest planning mistakes cities make is copying what worked somewhere else, without asking if it fits their own environment. Urban design is not universal, yet many cities borrowed foreign models wholesale, ignoring climate, culture, and local behavior. You can see this in places that imported Western suburban layouts into regions where they make no sense. In hot countries, wide-open streets without shade become unbearable in summer. In developing cities, massive car-oriented roads were built, even though few people could afford cars. The result: empty highways beside overcrowded sidewalks. The same problem happened under centralized planning systems. Soviet-style housing blocks were replicated across completely different regions, from Eastern Europe to Central Asia. They provided uniformity, but not comfort, and most lacked the social or cultural identity that makes a city feel like home. This copy-and-paste mindset continues today. Some Middle Eastern cities replicate American-style sprawl. Others mimic the glass skyline aesthetic of Hong Kong or Dubai, regardless of local needs. But cities that plan successfully do the opposite. They adapt global ideas to local realities. They design for how people actually live, not for how another city looks. Urban planning is not about imitation, it's about translation. Zoning laws. When cities first introduced zoning, the idea sounded logical. Keep noisy factories away from homes and schools. But over time, this simple rule grew into one of the biggest mistakes in urban planning. Zoning laws began separating every type of land use. Residential here, commercial there, industry somewhere far away. On paper, it created order. In practice, it destroyed proximity. In most modern cities, people live in one zone, work in another, and shop in a third. You can't walk anywhere meaningful because everything useful is miles apart. The result is total dependence on cars, even for short trips like buying milk or dropping kids at school. This approach also made mixed-use neighborhoods, where you can live above a cafe or near your office, technically illegal in many countries. It's why so many suburbs look identical, rows of houses with nothing else nearby. Street life disappeared because there was simply nothing to walk to. And zoning didn't just separate land uses, it often separated people. Many early zoning maps were designed to exclude lower-income families or minorities by setting minimum lot sizes or banning apartments altogether. The social cost of that planning still echoes today. Ignoring public transit. For much of the 20th century, public transit wasn't seen as a necessity. It was seen as a backup plan for those who couldn't afford a car. That mindset shaped how cities grew. Instead of expanding subways and trams, governments poured billions into roads, parking garages, and flyovers. The result was predictable. As cities sprawled outward, trains and buses couldn't keep up. Routes became longer, slower, and less convenient. Once reliable systems like streetcars in Los Angeles or Cleveland were dismantled entirely. Their tracks literally ripped out to make room for cars. And when transit vanished, so did accessibility. Without buses or trains, lower-income families faced longer commutes, higher expenses, and fewer job options. For many, freedom meant owning a car, and paying for gas, insurance, and maintenance just to participate in city life. Some countries did the opposite. Japan invested heavily in rail and built cities around train stations, not highways. As a result, Tokyo, one of the most populated cities on Earth, moves 37 million people every day with near-perfect efficiency. Highways destruction. During the mid-20th century, cities around the world began demolishing old neighborhoods to make way for highways. Planners believed carving wide roads through downtowns would solve congestion and bring growth. Instead, it did the opposite. Entire communities were split in half. Homes, shops, and schools were bulldozed to make room for concrete expressways. In the United States alone, more than 1 million people, mostly from working-class and minority areas, were displaced by urban highway projects. The Claiborne Expressway in New Orleans, for instance, destroyed a thriving black business district. Similar stories played out in cities like Detroit, Syracuse, and Miami. These highways didn't just break neighborhoods physically, they also cut them off economically. Property values dropped, businesses closed, and what were once lively streets became noisy corridors filled with traffic and pollution. Even outside the US, the pattern repeated. London's Westway and Tokyo's elevated highways turned dense, walkable areas into zones dominated by cars and fumes. It took decades for cities to realize the damage. Some are now undoing it. Boston buried its central freeway in the Big Dig, while Seoul removed a highway entirely to restore the Cheonggycheon River. These reversals show that cities function better when people, not cars, connect their neighborhoods. Public housing design. When cities faced housing shortages after World War II, governments rushed to build large public housing projects. The idea was simple: provide affordable homes quickly. But the design choices that followed turned many of these projects into symbols of failure. Most were built as tall concrete towers, isolated from schools, shops, and public transport. Planners treated housing as a numbers problem: how many units could fit into a plot of land, instead of focusing on how people would actually live there. These towers lacked community spaces, natural light, and safety. Over time, maintenance declined, and social problems grew. The most infamous example was Pruitt-Igoe in St. Louis, once praised as a modern solution to urban poverty. Within 2 decades, it became so unsafe and neglected that the entire complex was demolished. The same story repeated in Paris's banlieues and across parts of Eastern Europe. But it wasn't public housing itself that failed. It was the planning. Good housing design isn't just about providing walls and roofs. It's about building communities that work, socially, economically, and spatially. Skyscraper obsession. For decades, cities have measured success by how tall their skylines look. The higher the towers, the more modern the city seemed. But this obsession with skyscrapers and mega projects often ignored how cities actually function. Many of these projects were built as symbols, not solutions. Developers filled skylines with glass towers, office complexes, and luxury apartments, while the streets below remained empty. These areas look impressive from afar, but often feel disconnected at ground level. There's little shade, no public seating, and no sense of community. In some cities, entire districts became real estate investments rather than places to live. Hudson Yards in New York is a prime example, a multi-billion-dollar development criticized for being sterile and exclusive. Certain ghost city projects in China show the same pattern: grand vision, limited public life. Density itself is not the problem. Cities like Hong Kong and Singapore are dense but still livable because their tall buildings coexist with vibrant street-level life, efficient transport, and public spaces. The mistake happens when cities build height without humanity, when the goal becomes vertical growth instead of livable design. Skyscrapers can serve a purpose, but when they dominate planning priorities, cities risk becoming collections of towers instead of communities. Poor flood and heat planning. For much of modern history, city planning treated nature as an obstacle, something to be paved over and controlled. That mindset worked for a while until climate change made its consequences impossible to ignore. Many cities built entire districts on floodplains, drained wetlands for real estate, and replaced trees with concrete. When storms came, the water had nowhere to go. Houston, for example, expanded so quickly that natural drainage was lost, leading to devastating floods. The same problem affects Karachi, Jakarta, and Manila, where rapid construction outpaced drainage and green space planning. And when the water is not rising, the temperature is. Dense concrete and asphalt trap heat, creating urban heat islands where temperatures can be several degrees higher than surrounding areas. Cities like Phoenix and Delhi now experience dangerously high summer temperatures, directly tied to poor planning decisions. The good news is that some cities are adapting. China's Sponge City program is redesigning urban areas to absorb rainwater through permeable pavements, green roofs, and restored wetlands. Singapore and Copenhagen are integrating parks that double as flood basins during heavy rains. Neglecting pedestrians and cyclists. In many modern cities, pedestrians and cyclists were treated as afterthoughts, or worse, as obstacles that slowed down traffic. Roads were widened, sidewalks narrowed, and pedestrian crossings pushed farther apart. Over time, walking became inconvenient, and cycling became dangerous. When you make a city hostile to movement without a car, people stop using the streets. And when people disappear, so does public life. Empty sidewalks mean fewer local shops, weaker community bonds, and less safety overall. Some of the most car-dependent cities today have pedestrian infrastructure that feels more like an obstacle course. You might need to cross multiple lanes of traffic, climb overpasses, or squeeze through narrow walkways, all while inhaling exhaust fumes. Cycling, too, is often treated as a recreational activity rather than a legitimate way to commute. But when cities prioritize people over vehicles, everything changes. Copenhagen and Amsterdam built networks of protected bike lanes that connect directly to homes, offices, and schools. Paris has spent the last decade removing car lanes and adding hundreds of kilometers of cycling paths, transforming the city's atmosphere entirely. The result is not just less traffic, it's more life.